The silence in the school cafeteria was a specific kind of sound. It was not the absence of noise. It was the presence of 1,000 tiny noises that added up to a single weary hum: the scrape of plastic trays on metal runners, the distant clang of a pot in the kitchen, the rhythmic squeak of her own orthopedic shoes on the polished linoleum. Elara Dubois had become a connoisseur of silences. There was the brittle, angry silence of her empty apartment after Marcus had left, taking the art from the walls and the air from her lungs. There was the heavy, suffocating silence of the courtroom where her name was stripped from the restaurants she had built with her own 2 hands. And now there was this, the low, institutional silence of survival. She stood behind the hot food line, her movements economical and precise, her hands, which had once plated dishes worthy of Michelin stars, now scooped macaroni and cheese into partitioned trays. She did it with the same focused grace, the same conservation of motion. Her posture was erect, her chin level. She wore the drab, shapeless uniform, a pale green polo shirt and a hairnet, like a disguise. It was a shield against the pity or, worse, the recognition in the eyes of the wealthy parents who sometimes drifted through the pristine halls of Northwood Preparatory Academy. This was not a place for someone like her, yet it was the only place that would have her. Anonymity was a form of payment, and she was deeply in its debt. Most of the children were a blur of plaid uniforms and chaotic energy. They grabbed their food, offered a mumbled "thanks," and moved on. But one was different. A small girl with hair the color of spun moonlight, held back by a simple black velvet band. Her eyes were a startling, serious gray, and she moved with a quiet deliberation that was unusual in a child her age. Her name was Lily Vance. She never clamored for the extra cookie or complained about the vegetables. She simply took her tray, her small face a mask of solemn politeness. Today, however, she paused. She pushed her tray forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Elara's face. Elara's professional smile, a thin, practiced thing, was already in place. "Hello, Lily. The chicken or the pasta today?" The little girl didn't answer immediately. Her gray eyes seemed to see past the hairnet and the uniform, past the exhaustion etched around Elara's own eyes. She saw something. Or perhaps she was just looking for a place to put a thought too heavy for her small shoulders. "My daddy cries at night," she said. The statement was delivered without affect, a simple declaration of fact, like reporting the weather. It landed in the space between them with a soft, profound weight. The hum of the cafeteria seemed to recede. Elara's smile faltered, the practiced muscle forgetting its function. She looked at this tiny, serious child, and for the first time in a long time she felt a crack in the careful armor she had built around her heart. She did not know what to say. Sympathy was a language she had forgotten how to speak. It felt too close to pity, and pity was a currency she refused to trade in. She thought about the prescribed responses. "I'm sorry to hear that. Everything will be okay." But they were hollow, untrue. So she knew, better than most, that sometimes things were not okay. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to match the girl's quiet tone. "Does he?" Lily nodded, a single solemn dip of her chin. Her bottom lip trembled for a fraction of a second. "He thinks I'm asleep, but I hear him. His shoulders shake." She demonstrated a small, jerky movement of her own slender shoulders. Elara's heart clenched. She looked at the plate in front of Lily. On impulse, she reached past the divider and placed a second brownie next to the first. It was against the rules, a tiny, insignificant rebellion. She met the girl's wide eyes. "Sometimes," Elara said, her voice a low murmur, "grown-ups have big feelings that get stuck. Crying is just how they let them out. It doesn't mean he's not strong. It just means he's feeling." Lily considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. She looked at the extra brownie, then back at Elara. A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a lightning, passed over her face. "Okay," she whispered. She took her tray and walked away, her small back ramrod straight. Alara watched her go, a strange ache settling in her chest. She thought about a man she had never met, a faceless father crying in the dark. She thought about his shaking shoulders and his daughter who was brave enough to bear witness. The hum of the cafeteria returned, but it sounded different now. It sounded like a world full of quiet, hidden sorrows. She had no idea who this man was, but she felt a thread of connection to his unseen grief, a shared residency in the land of the brokenhearted. The end of the day came with a blessed wave of real silence, the kind that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. Alara scrubbed the stainless steel counters until they gleamed, her reflection a distorted, weary stranger. The smell of bleach was sharp and clean, erasing the day's lingering sense of boiled vegetables and baked goods. It was a ritual of erasure, one she performed with methodical devotion, wiping away the day, wiping away the pity, wiping away the memory of a kitchen that smelled of fresh basil and roasting garlic, of her name in elegant script above the door. Dubois. It felt like a name from a novel she'd once read about someone else's life. As she was untying her apron, a presence filled the doorway to the kitchen. It was not a sound, but a shift in the air, a change in the quality of the light. She turned. Stay Marcus Thorne stood there, leaning against the doorframe with a practiced ease that set her teeth on edge. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive suit, tailored to show off the physique he spent hours cultivating at the gym. His smile was the same one he used for magazine photographers, a flash of white teeth that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that he believed he had created and could therefore control. He saw the uniform, the hairnet, the exhaustion. He saw defeat. Well, well, he drawled, his voice slithering into the clean, sterile space. Look what we have here, from head chef to lunch lady. It's a long fall, isn't it, Alara? She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not give him the satisfaction. Her hands, which had been fumbling with the knot of her apron, stilled. She straightened her spine, a subtle shift that was as much a declaration as a shout. She met his gaze and held it. Marcus, she said. Her voice was level, devoid of the emotion he was trying so desperately to mine. What are you doing here? This is a school. I'm a benefactor, he said, pushing off the doorframe and taking a step into the kitchen. He gestured vaguely at the pristine surroundings. I donate, generously. It ensures the little darlings get the best, though clearly the standards for staffing have slipped. The insult was designed to flay her open. A year ago, it would have. Tonight, it felt like a pebble thrown against a fortress wall. She had been through worse than his petty cruelty. She had survived him. If you're here for an inspection. The kitchen is closed, she said, turning to hang her apron on its designated hook. It was a small act of dismissal, of ownership over her space, however humble. His smile tightened. He was not accustomed to being dismissed. He moved closer, his expensive cologne a cloying invasion. I heard you were destitute. I didn't realize it was this pathetic. Serving slop to children. You, who once lectured me on the integrity of the hollandaise. The hollandaise was consistently breaking because you insisted the kitchen use cheaper butter, Marcus. It was a business decision, not a moral failing. Her voice was cold, precise, the voice of a chef diagnosing a problem. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. He hated being reminded that his business acumen was a fraction of hers. He had the swagger, the connections, the ruthlessness. She had the talent. It was the central, unforgivable truth of their entire history. You have an obligation to me, he said, the charming facade dropping away to reveal the raw entitlement beneath. The brand, the name, it's all tied to you. My investors are asking questions. They want to know where the visionary behind Thorne Gastronomy went. She went to work at a school cafeteria, Alara said flatly. You made sure of that. You took the restaurants. You took my name. You took everything. The obligation is fulfilled. Sign the papers, he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. He pulled a thick envelope from his inner jacket pocket and tossed it onto the counter she had just polished. The sound was a violation. It's a new non-compete and a non-disclosure. It gives you a small stipend. Enough to get out of this. He waved a hand in disgust. And it keeps your mouth shut. She looked at the envelope, then back at him. Not because he was sorry, but because he was caught. Because his hollow empire was built on her stolen foundation, and the cracks were beginning to show. He needed to bury her, officially this time. No, she said, his face contorted with rage. The mask of the charming benefactor fell away completely. You ungrateful! He lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. The hand connected, his fingers, adorned with a gaudy signet ring, dug into the soft flesh of her upper arm. Pain, sharp and ugly, lanced up to her shoulder. Her breath hitched. It was always this, with him. The moment words failed him, force took their place. "Let go of my arm," she said. The words were quiet, but they were not pleading. They were a command. "You will sign those papers," he snarled, his face close to hers. "You owe me. You will do what you're told." She said to let go of her arm. The voice was new. It came from the doorway where Marcus had stood only moments before. It was a low, calm baritone, steady as iron wrapped in silk. It did not carry anger or threat. It carried an absolute, unshakable authority that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. Marcus froze. His grip loosened instinctively. Both he and Alara turned toward the sound. A man stood there silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. He was not imposing in the way Marcus was, all puffed-up chest and aggressive posture. His power was in his stillness. He did not rush. He was not performing. He was simply present, and his presence changed the fundamental physics of the room. Behind him, peeking out from behind his leg, was the small, serious face of Lily Vance. The man's gaze was not on Marcus. It was on Alara. He took in her uniform, her pale face, the handprint already blooming on her arm. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes, a deep, cold stillness, intensified. Then, his gaze shifted to Marcus. It was a slow, deliberate movement. "I believe," the man said, his voice still unnervingly calm, "that constitutes assault and trespassing." Marcus, for the first time, seemed to recognize him. A flicker of panic crossed his face, quickly masked by his habitual arrogance. "Vance," he said, attempting a familiar tone that fell flat. "Julian, I was just having a private conversation with an old employee." He released Alara's arm completely, taking a half step back. Julian Vance's eyes, the same startling gray as his daughter's, did not leave Marcus's face. "It didn't look like a conversation." He took a step into the kitchen. He did not look at the pristine counters or the industrial equipment. He looked only at the two people. His focus was a tangible force. "Lily came to me. She said you were yelling." Marcus forced a laugh. It was a brittle, ugly sound. A misunderstanding. You know how children are. Alara and I have a long history. It can get passionate. Julian's gaze flickered back to Alara. He saw the way she held herself, the rigid control in her posture, the slight tremor in her hand that she quickly fisted to hide. He saw the lie in Marcus's casual dismissal. He looked back at Marcus. "I see." 2 words. They carried the weight of a verdict. He took out his phone, a slim, dark rectangle of glass and metal. He tapped the screen once. His movements were unhurried, precise. "Security," he said into the phone, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "There is a man in the cafeteria kitchen who is trespassing. His name is Marcus Thorne. Please escort him off the premises, and have legal draft a restraining order. Effective immediately." He paused, his eyes still locked on Marcus's now pale face. "And cancel my company's sponsorship of his table at the Obsidian Gala. He is no longer welcome." He pocketed the phone. He had not raised his voice. He had not made a threat. He had simply stated a series of events that were now, irrevocably, in motion. The structural power of his world was being brought to bear, silently and with devastating efficiency. Marcus stared, his mouth slightly agape. The color had drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed shock. The swagger, the performative confidence, it all evaporated in the face of this quiet, absolute power. This was not a power he could negotiate with or bully. It was the power of foundations and systems, of boards and contracts and capital. It was a power that could erase him. "Now, wait a minute, Vance," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "You can't. We have a relationship. My company—" "You have a relationship with a line item in my marketing budget," Julian corrected him, his voice laced with ice. "A line item I have just deleted. I believe you were leaving." Two men in dark suits appeared in the doorway. They moved with a silent, coordinated purpose that spoke of years of training. They did not look at Julian. They did not look at Alara. Their focus was entirely on Marcus. One of them gestured toward the hallway. The gesture was polite, but it was not a request. Marcus looked from Julian's implacable face to the impassive security guards. He looked at Alara, who stood watching, her expression unreadable. He had lost. Completely and humiliatingly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. His world, which had seemed so solid moments ago, had become gossamer. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, flanked by the two guards. He did not look back. The envelope with the non-compete lay forgotten on the counter, a monument to his fatal miscalculation. The kitchen was silent again, but this was a new kind of silence. It was vast, echoing, and filled with the ghost of a tectonic shift. Alara stood by the counter, her hand unconsciously rubbing the spot on her arm where Marcus had grabbed her. She stared at the empty doorway, her mind struggling to process the rapid, brutal efficiency of what had just occurred. Julian Vance did not move. He waited until the sound of footsteps faded down the hall. Then he turned his attention fully to Alara. His gaze softened, the icy authority replaced by a quiet concern. He took in her pale, shocked face, the faint red marks on her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was gentle now. She could only nod, the words sticking in her throat. She felt disoriented, as if she had been caught in the undertow and then suddenly deposited on a strange and unfamiliar shore. The relief of being safe was so profound, so alien, that it was almost painful. Lily, who had been a silent witness to the entire exchange, finally stepped out from behind her father's leg. She walked over to Alara, her small face filled with a worry that was achingly adult. She reached out a tiny hand and gently touched Alara's arm, her fingers tracing the red marks left by Marcus's grip. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. The simple, innocent question broke through Alara's shock. She looked down at the little girl, at the genuine concern in her gray eyes, and something inside her finally gave way. Not a sob, not a breakdown, but a slow, deep exhale that seemed to carry with it years of tension she hadn't even realized she was holding. "A little," Ilara admitted, her voice hoarse. "But it will be okay." Julian watched the interaction, his expression unreadable, but for the deep, thoughtful concentration in his eyes. He was processing information, connecting points on a map she couldn't see. He looked from his daughter's hand on Alara's arm to the forgotten envelope on the counter. He walked over and picked it up, his movements still precise and deliberate. He glanced at the sender's information, his lips thinning into a hard line. Then he looked at Ilara. "You're Ilara Dubois," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of recognition. The sound of her own name, her real name, spoken with such certainty in this place of her erasure, was a shock. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. How did you know?" "Vance Holdings is in the final stages of acquiring a national restaurant chain," he explained, his voice a low, factual murmur. one that absorbed a smaller, high-end group called Thorn Gastronomy about 2 years ago. I was reviewing the original incorporation documents yesterday. The founding chef, the architect of the entire culinary concept, was Ilara Dubois. He held her gaze. I read about what happened, the hostile takeover, the lawsuits, the smearing of your name in the press. He paused. The file I read painted a portrait of one of the most innovative chefs of the last decade. It did not align with the person Marcus Thorne was trying to bury. She stared at him, speechless. He had seen her, not the lunch lady, not Marcus's victim. He had seen the person she used to be, the person she still was, what deep beneath the layers of failure and grief. He had seen her work. The knowledge was a dizzying, disorienting relief. It was like being found after having been lost for a very long time. "My car is outside," he said, his tone shifting from explanatory to practical. "My driver can take you home. It's not safe for you to go alone tonight." It was not an offer. It was a statement of what was about to happen. "Mr. Harrison, my assistant, will be in touch tomorrow. We need to discuss your role in the future of your company." He turned to his daughter. "Come, Lily, let's let Miss Dubois get her things." Lily looked up at Ilara. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. Ilara looked from the child to the father, this powerful, quiet man who had just dismantled her tormentor with a few words and a phone call. This man who saw her not as a fallen woman, but as a founder. She felt a tectonic plate shift beneath her feet, the landscape of her life reforming into something new and terrifying and full of a fragile, unfamiliar hope. "Yes," she said, the word feeling more true than anything she had said in years. "I'll be here." The ride home was a silent, surreal dream. She sat in the back of a black Maybach, the leather cool and smooth against her skin. The city slid past the tinted windows, a blur of neon and light. The car was utterly silent, a moving vault of peace. She was intensely aware of Julian Vance sitting beside her, his presence a solid, calming weight. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He simply existed in the space with her, offering a buffer against the harsh edges of the world. When they arrived at her modest apartment building, its shabby brick facade a stark contrast to the vehicle at the curb, he got out with her. A security car, a dark sedan she hadn't even noticed was following them, pulled up discreetly behind. Two men got out and began a quiet, professional sweep of the building's entrance. "My head of security will ensure the building is secure," Julian said, his voice a low rumble in the night air. "They will remain here for the night. A new team will take over in the morning." Ilara stared at him. "That's not necessary." The words were automatic, a product of years of refusing help, of insisting on her own sufficiency even when she was drowning. "It is," he said simply. There was no room for argument in his tone. "Marcus is predictable. When his pride is wounded, he becomes reckless. I won't have you or my daughter be the target of that recklessness." The mention of Lily was a deliberate anchor. He was not doing this for a stranger. He was doing it for the woman who had shown his daughter a moment of kindness, the woman his daughter had worried about. It framed the gesture not as charity, but as a logical protective measure. It made it easier to accept. She nodded, unable to find the words to thank him. The gratitude was too large, too overwhelming. It felt like a tidal wave that would sweep her away if she let it. He walked her to the lobby door. Under the flickering fluorescent light, he looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man shouldering an immense weight. She could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the same ones she saw in her own reflection. She remembered his daughter's words. "My daddy cries at night." "Thank you," she finally managed to say, the words feeling small and inadequate. "For everything." He inclined his head, a small, formal gesture. "You showed my daughter a kindness she rarely receives. You spoke to her as a person. I am merely returning the favor." He paused, his gray eyes searching her face. "Mr. Harrison will call you at 9. My office. We have much to discuss." And then he was gone, disappearing back into the silent, luxurious cocoon of the Maybach. Alara watched until the taillights vanished around the corner. She stood in the dingy lobby, the scent of his expensive suit still faintly in the air, a phantom of a world she had thought was lost to her forever. For the first time in 2 years, the silence of her apartment building didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. The next morning, Alara dressed with meticulous care. She chose a simple, architecturally precise sheath dress in a deep charcoal gray. It was one of the few pieces of her old life she had kept, a relic of a time when she commanded boardrooms and tasting menus. She did her hair, pulling it back into a sleek, severe chignon that exposed the elegant line of her neck. The transformation was startling. The weary lunch lady was gone, replaced by a woman of cool, formidable competence. It was not a costume. It was an excavation. She was unearthing herself. At precisely 9 o'clock, a black car, different from the Maybach but no less imposing, was waiting for her. The driver, a man with a placid face and watchful eyes, simply opened the door for her. He did not need her name. He knew who she was. Vance Tower was a spear of black glass and steel that pierced the clouds. It was a monument to a different kind of power than Marcus's flashy, brittle version. This was deep, quiet, structural power. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed efficiency. People moved with purpose, their voices low. No one ran. No one shouted. The air itself seemed to hum with controlled energy. A man in a perfectly tailored suit, Mr. Harrison, met her at the elevator bank. He had kind eyes and the air of someone who had already solved 3 problems she hadn't even thought of yet. "Miss Dubois, Mr. Vance is expecting you." The elevator ascended in a smooth, silent rush. They did not stop at any other floors. The doors opened directly into a sprawling corner office. 3 of the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, so offering a godlike view of the city spread out below. The 4th wall was lined with books. The desk was a massive slab of dark, polished wood, but it was not cluttered. It held only a sleek laptop, a single leather-bound journal, and a small, framed photograph of a woman with a warm, laughing smile and Lily's moon-colored hair. The grieving man's ghost. Julian Vance was not at his desk. He was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned as she entered. He was dressed in a dark blue suit today, the color deepening the gray of his eyes. "Miss Dubois," he said, his voice the same calm baritone. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Vance," she replied, her own voice steady. He gestured to a seating area with 2 low, comfortable-looking armchairs and a small table. "Please." She sat, her back straight, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She felt strangely at home in the quiet, powerful atmosphere of the office. This was a language she understood, the language of focus, of intention, of high stakes. He sat opposite her. He did not engage in small talk. "I spent the morning reviewing the Thorne Gastronomy acquisition file again, this time with the information from last night as context. It's clear that Marcus Thorne systematically dismantled your reputation and leveraged your intellectual property to build his brand after forcing you out." Alara said nothing. She simply listened. It was validating hearing the cold, hard facts of her own violation stated so plainly. "The company we are acquiring is, in essence, a hollowed-out version of what you originally created," he continued. "The brand is tarnished, the quality has plummeted, and customer loyalty is at an all-time low. It is, from a purely business perspective, a failing asset." He leaned forward slightly. "However, the foundation is still there. The core concepts, the culinary DNA that you created. That has value. Immense value." He paused, holding her gaze. "I am not interested in acquiring Thorne Gastronomy. I am interested in resurrecting Dubois Gastronomy. And I want you to lead it." The offer hung in the air between them, monumental. It was everything she had lost, handed back to her on a silver platter. But it wasn't a platter. It was a battlefield, a chance to fight. She was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing. Fear warred with a fierce, burning desire. The fear was a familiar companion, whispering of betrayal, of dependency, of the pain of losing it all a second time. But the desire was older, stronger. It was the desire that had driven her to work 18-hour days, to perfect a sauce for weeks, to build an empire from a single perfect idea. "Why?" she asked, the single word cutting through the silence. "This is a personal crusade for you. It's not just business." Julian did not flinch from the accusation. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze dropping to the photograph on his desk for a fraction of a second. "My wife, Elena," he said, his voice softening with a grief that was still raw. "She loved your first restaurant, L'Atelier. We had our first date there. We celebrated our engagement there. It was our place." He looked back at Ilara, his eyes stripped bare of the CEO's armor. "When it was taken from you, when your name was dragged through the mud, she was furious. She saw it for what it was, the theft of a woman's legacy by an insecure man. She followed the story for months. It offended her sense of justice." He took a slow breath. "She passed away a year and a half ago. The acquisition of this chain, it was one of the last projects she urged me to look into. She wanted to see you vindicated." The confession was a profound, intimate gift. It recontextualized everything. This wasn't about him saving her. It was about him fulfilling a promise to the woman he loved. It was about justice, a cause she could believe in. "So, yes," he admitted, his voice regaining its steady composure. "It is personal, but it is also a sound business decision. I do not make unsound business decisions. Your talent is a severely undervalued asset. I intend to correct the market." The corporate metaphor was strangely comforting. It framed her worth in a language he respected, a language of tangible value. He was not offering charity. He was making an investment. "What are the terms?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. She was no longer a victim. She was a party in a negotiation. A slow, faint smile touched his lips. It was the first she had ever seen. It reached his eyes, warming their gray depths. "You will be the CEO and Chief Creative Officer of the newly formed Dubois Gastronomy Group, a fully funded subsidiary of Vance Holdings. You will have complete creative control, a budget to build your team, and final say on all locations and concepts. Your starting salary will be—" he named a figure that made her breath catch. "And you will have a 20% equity stake in the subsidiary. An equity stake that will be yours, protected by the best lawyers Vance Holdings can employ, regardless of any future circumstances." He was giving her a fortress, not just a castle, but a fortress with ironclad legal walls to protect it, to protect her. He was anticipating the fear of betrayal and preemptively neutralizing it. "In return," he continued, "I expect you to restore the company to profitability within 3 years. And I expect you to crush Marcus Thorne's legacy until there is nothing left but dust." The last sentence was delivered with a cold, quiet finality that sent a shiver down her spine. It was not a statement of anger. It was a statement of intent. She looked out the window at the sprawling city, at the world that had chewed her up and spit her out, and she felt the fire in her belly, the one she thought had been extinguished, roar back to life. "I accept," she said. The weeks that followed were a blur of intense, exhilarating work. Ilara moved into a temporary corporate apartment provided by Vance Holdings, a sleek, minimalist space with the same stunning city views as Julian's office. It was a gilded cage, but a welcome one. It was safe. She spent her days in a state-of-the-art test kitchen that Julian had commissioned for her, deconstructing the failures of Thorne gastronomy and rebuilding her culinary vision from the ground up. She worked with a relentless, joyful focus that she had not felt in years. She hired a team, poaching the best and brightest sous chefs and pastry chefs, many of whom had worked for her in the old days and who came back to her with a fierce, unquestioning loyalty. Julian was a constant, quiet presence. He did not interfere. He did not micromanage. He would appear in the test kitchen late at night, after his own grueling day was over, and simply watch. He would sit on a stool in the corner, nursing a glass of water, his tie loosened, the CEO armor shed. They rarely talked about work in those late hours. Instead, they talked about other things. She told him about growing up in New Orleans, learning to cook at her grandmother's knee. He told her about Elena, about their shared love for old movies and sailing. He spoke of his grief not as a wound, but as a landscape he now inhabited. One night, as she was perfecting a delicate saffron broth, he spoke of his daughter. Lily is different since Elena passed, quieter, more observant. She carries a lot of weight for a 7-year-old. She's a remarkable little girl, Ilara said, not looking up from her pot. She sees things. She sees you, Julian said softly. She asks about you. She asked me if she could have a cooking lesson with the lady who makes the good brownies. Ilara finally looked up, a real smile touching her lips. Anytime. The cooking lesson happened on a Sunday. Julian brought Lily not to the gleaming test kitchen, but to Ilara's apartment. It was a deliberate choice, a step toward a different kind of intimacy. Lily arrived clutching a small, worn teddy bear, her gray eyes wide with a mixture of shyness and excitement. Ilara had set up a small station for her on the kitchen island, how complete with a miniature apron and a set of child-safe utensils. They made chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Ilara showed Lily how to measure the flour, how to crack an egg with one hand, how to feel the dough to know when it was just right. Julian did not participate. He sat at the counter, watching them, a quiet, unreadable expression on his face. He watched the way Ilara spoke to his daughter, with a gentle respect that never condescended. He watched the way Lily, who was so often reserved and solemn, opened up, her face lighting up as she stirred the batter, a smudge of flour on her nose. For a few hours, they were not a CEO, a chef, and a grieving child. They were just 2 adults and a little girl, filling an apartment with the warm, sweet smell of baking cookies. It was a fragile, perfect moment of domesticity, a glimpse of a life that could be. As they were leaving, Lily hugged Ilara tightly around the legs. "Thank you," she whispered into the fabric of Ilara's jeans. This was the best day. After they left, Ilara stood in her silent kitchen, the scent of cookies still warm in the air. She touched the spot on her jeans where Lily had hugged her. The feeling of being needed, of being a source of joy for this sad, serious little girl, was a powerful, anchoring force. It was becoming harder and harder to maintain the professional distance she knew she should. Her life was becoming entangled with Julian's and Lily's in a way that was both wonderful and terrifying. Meanwhile, Marcus was not silent. Blind with arrogance, he completely misjudged the situation. He saw Ilara's new position not as a testament to her talent, but as a sordid transaction. He could not comprehend a world where she was valued for her mind, so he assumed she was being valued for her body. He began a campaign of harassment. He filed a frivolous lawsuit, claiming she had stolen his intellectual property, the very recipes she had created. His lawyers sent threatening letters. He leaked stories to gossip columns, painting her as a gold-digging opportunist who had seduced a grieving billionaire. Ilara would find the articles, sent to her by Julian's ever-vigilant legal team, and a cold dread would wash over her. But Julian was a bulwark against the storm. "It's noise," he would say, his voice calm and steady over the phone. "He is a cornered animal, making noise. Don't read it. My team is handling it." And they did. The lawsuits were countersued into oblivion. The gossip columns were met with threats of defamation suits from Vance Holdings' formidable legal department, and they quickly printed retractions. Julian's power was not loud or flashy, but it was absolute. He was quietly and systematically dismantling Marcus's ability to do her harm. Marcus's fatal miscalculation came in the form of an invitation. The Obsidian Gala, the premier philanthropic event of the year, was hosted by Vance Holdings. It was the epicenter of power and influence in the city. After his public humiliation in the school kitchen, his invitation had been revoked. But in his delusion, he saw the gala as the perfect stage for his final move. He would confront them publicly, expose Ilara as a fraud, and humiliate Julian in front of his peers. He managed to secure a ticket through a third party, a man who owed him a favor and who had not yet heard that Marcus Thorne was a falling star. The night of the gala, Ilara stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Julian had sent a dress to her. It was a masterpiece of emerald green silk that clung to her body like water. It was elegant, powerful, and unapologetically beautiful. Wearing it felt like wearing a declaration of war. Julian arrived to escort her. He was dressed in a classic black tuxedo that made him look like something out of a film. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes taking in the sight of her. The professional composure he usually wore cracked, just for a moment, revealing a raw, unguarded admiration. "Ilara," he breathed. The single word was more potent than 1,000 compliments. At the gala, the power shift was palpable. The moment they entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to them. Julian Vance was a private, almost reclusive figure. To see him at his own gala was rare. To see him with a stunning, unknown woman on his arm was an event. Ilara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, assessing her. But Julian's hand was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back. He guided her through the room with an effortless grace, his presence a shield. He introduced her not as his date, but as his colleague. "This is Ilara Dubois," he would say to a banking magnate or a political heavyweight, "the CEO of our new gastronomy group. She's going to revolutionize the industry, again." With every introduction, he was rebuilding her name, brick by brick, in the minds of the most powerful people in the city. He was giving her back her reputation, polished and improved. It was near the end of the evening when Marcus made his move. Ilara was standing alone for a moment, near the French doors that led to a terrace, when he cornered her. He was flushed, his eyes overly bright. He'd clearly been drinking. "Look at you," he sneered, his voice a low, vicious rasp. "Playing the queen. Do you really think this will last? He'll get tired of you. They always do." "Go home, Marcus," she said, her voice cold. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and punishing, just as it had been in the kitchen. "You have an obligation to me. You are my creation. Everything you have, you owe to me." He was louder now, his voice carrying. People were starting to turn, to stare. The scene was exactly what he wanted, a public spectacle. "Let go of her." Julian's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the rising murmur of the crowd like a razor. He was standing right behind Marcus, his face a mask of cold, lethal calm. He had not rushed. He had simply appeared. Marcus turned, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Vance, good. I wanted you to hear this. This woman is a fraud. She's using you. She's nothing without me." Julian ignored him. His eyes were on Marcus's hand, still clamped around Ilara's arm. "I will not ask you again," he said, the temperature in his voice dropping several degrees. Marcus, emboldened by the audience and his own deluded rage, laughed. "Or what? You'll have your goons throw me out again?" "No," Julian said. "Nothing so crude." He took a small step forward. He did not touch Marcus. He simply began to speak, his voice a low, clear monologue that was audible only to those in their immediate vicinity, but which would soon ripple through the entire room. "I've been spending a great deal of time with my legal and acquisitions teams lately, Marcus. It's fascinating what you find during due diligence. For example, did you know that the holding company that owns the mortgage on your penthouse is, in fact, a subsidiary of a private equity firm that Vance Holdings acquired 6 weeks ago?" Marcus's smirk faltered. His grip on Ilara's arm loosened. "And the bank that holds the exorbitant line of credit for your failing restaurant group?" Julian continued, his voice relentlessly calm. "I had a lovely chat with their chairman this morning. He's an old friend. We sit on a board together. So he was very interested to see the evidence of fraud my forensic accountants uncovered." Your accounts have been frozen, pending a federal investigation. The color drained from Marcus's face. He let go of Alara's arm as if he'd been burned. The offshore accounts you used to hide your assets? The shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands? My international division is very thorough. We own them now. All of them. Julian took out his phone. He didn't look at it. He just held it. As of 5 minutes ago, my board unanimously approved the hostile takeover of what remains of Thorne Gastronomy. It is now my property, and my first act as owner was to file a motion to dismiss your frivolous lawsuit against Miss Dubois. My second was to file a criminal complaint against you for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and wire fraud. He finally looked at Marcus, his gray eyes devoid of any emotion at all. They were the eyes of a god passing judgment. You don't have a company, Marcus. You don't have a penthouse. As of this moment, you don't even have a bank account. You have nothing. You are nothing. The collapse was absolute. It was not a slow crumble. It was an implosion. Marcus Thorne's entire world, the whole hollow, glittering edifice of his life, disintegrated in the space of a 30-second monologue. His face, which had been contorted with rage, went slack with utter, devastating shock. A sound escaped his throat, a choked, guttural sob. His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor of the grand ballroom, a broken man in an expensive suit. He buried his face in his hands and began to weep, his body shaking with ragged, hysterical sobs. The room was utterly silent. The security team, who had been waiting discreetly, moved in. They did not touch him at first. They simply created a perimeter, their presence a quiet, final wall. They lifted him to his feet. He was sobbing uncontrollably, begging, the words incoherent. They escorted him out, not with violence, but with the quiet, inexorable efficiency of a tide pulling a piece of driftwood out to sea. Julian did not watch him go. He turned to Alara, his expression softening as his gaze met hers. He gently took her arm, his touch warm and protective where Marcus's had been brutal. The red marks were already fading. Then he turned to the stunned, silent crowd. He raised his voice just enough to carry through the vast room. "For those of you who may be wondering," he said, his voice ringing with a clear, calm authority, allow me to formally introduce my partner and colleague, Alara Dubois." He looked at her, a deep, profound respect in his eyes. She was the visionary founder of Dubois Gastronomy. After a 2-year hiatus, she has returned, and as the new CEO of the Dubois Gastronomy Group, she will be setting the standard for culinary excellence for years to come. I suggest you book your tables now. He was not just vindicating her. He was anointing her. He was using his immense power to lift her up, to place her on the pedestal she had built for herself, the one that had been stolen from her. Later that night, they stood on the private terrace of his office, the city lights spread out before them like a carpet of fallen stars. The cool night air was a balm. Alara leaned against the railing, the emerald silk of her dress whispering in the breeze. The weight she had carried for so long, the constant, grinding weight of injustice and failure, was gone. She felt light. She felt free. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Ruin him so completely." "Yes, I did," Julian replied, his voice a low rumble beside her. "Some people see kindness as weakness. They see silence as acquiescence. The only language they understand is absolute consequences. He needed to be taught that language." He turned to her, his profile sharp against the glittering skyline. "And he needed to be taught that you are not to be touched." She looked at him, at this quiet, formidable man who cried in the dark for his lost wife, who wielded his power like a surgeon's scalpel, and who had seen her, truly seen her, when she was invisible to the rest of the world. The slow burn of their connection, how built on shared meals and late-night conversations and mutual respect, had finally ignited into something warm and bright and undeniable. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers laced with hers, a simple, perfect fit. It was not a gesture of passion. but of partnership, of safety, of coming home. Elena would have liked this, he said quietly. She would have loved to see you win. I think I would have liked her, Ilara replied, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. A real smile touched her lips, one that reached her eyes and made them shine. She looked out at the city, no longer a hostile landscape, but a kingdom of possibility. The silence between them was no longer empty or weary. It was full. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a new beginning. The months that followed were a testament to that promise. The Dubois Gastronomy Group launched with a spectacular flagship restaurant, simply named Ilara's. The critics raved. The public clamored for reservations. It was more than a success. It was a resurrection. Ilara was not just back. She was ascendant. Her relationship with Julian deepened, not in a rush of breathless romance, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of daily life. They built a new kind of family, one founded on honesty and complication and the daily choice to stay. There were dinners where they worked through legal briefs and blueprints. There were weekends where they simply existed, reading in companionable silence. And there were cooking lessons with Lily, who was slowly but surely shedding her solemnity, her laughter becoming a frequent and welcome sound in their lives. One Saturday afternoon, the three of them were in the kitchen of Julian's sprawling penthouse, a space that was finally starting to feel like home. They were making pizza from scratch. Lily, now an expert at kneading dough, was chattering happily, her face dusted with flour. Julian, looking absurdly domestic in a fine cashmere sweater, was grating cheese with a focused intensity. Ilara stood back, watching them, a pot of her signature tomato sauce simmering on the stove. The scent, garlic, basil, oregano, was the smell of her past and her future, all at once. She looked at Julian, his shoulders relaxed, his face softened by a genuine smile as he listened to his daughter. She thought of the first thing she had ever known about him, that he cried at night. She didn't know when he had stopped. Perhaps he hadn't. Perhaps the grief was a permanent part of his landscape, but now, at least, there was light in that landscape too. He looked up and caught her watching him. His smile deepened. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. In his eyes, she saw the same thing she felt in her own heart, a profound, steady, and deeply grateful peace. The kind of peace that isn't given, but earned. The kind that comes after the storm, when you stand in the quiet aftermath and realize, with a slow, dawning certainty, that you are finally, irrevocably, safe, and you are home.